Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainability Revolution, Day 2, which we've called Revolution in Action. My name is Johnny Meehan, and I'm a sustainability practitioner and advisor at Business in the Community Ireland's the NGO for Sustainability Leadership for 21 years now. And first, I'd like to thank our sponsors for sponsoring this three-day series of events. These sponsors are also members of our network. And here is our member network, which is growing by the day. We have 114 member companies, 67 of which have signed a low carbon pledge, 49 of which have signed the Elevate Inclusive Workplace Pledge, and 40 of which have the Business Working Responsibly mark, which is a certified management system for sustainable business. There's a lot of work involved by all of the practitioners tuning in today, so I'd like to take this moment to thank all of you for your collaboration, for all of the platforms and work that's taking place underneath all of these programs. So thank you for that. Now, some housekeeping at the start. This webinar is being recorded. We have a Q&A box, so I encourage you to send in questions, but because it's a very full agenda, we are trying to finish within the hour. We won't have the opportunity to respond to your questions today, but we welcome your questions and we will respond in due course. Also, do take to social media to talk about this event. The handles are there. That's the hashtag SustRev21 and use at BITCI Ireland. So we have a very full agenda for you today. While all of the detail there is on the screen, let me just say that like a play, it has 3 acts. And I'll give you a little bit of context about why we have arranged the discussions as we have. Yesterday, a bit of a callback to day 1 of the revolution, there was a CEO conversation about leadership. Now today, day 2, it's very much about the practitioner perspective and very much focusing on how we do our work. Now, we've arranged it so that we have a conversation for the first segment with fellow sustainability practitioners. The second part is about a guide, a how-to guide on modern slavery. And then the third section I'll be leading, really focusing on 3 words that I'd like to anchor with you right now. And those are the words revolution, radical, and action. And what links these 3 acts is the sustainability perspective of practitioners. So the how-to is very important, how we adapt, how we respond to challenges, how we find information, how we use certain tools, and how we can challenge ourselves to do more, to be more radical, and how we can involve other people and collaborate more. So that brings me nicely onto the first section. In this conversation, I am discussing with 2 fellow practitioners I'd like to introduce now. Cathriona Fitzsimons is Group Head of Sustainability, Corporate Responsibility at PM Group. And Sinead Smith is Head of Responsible Business at A&L Goodbody. So we have PM Group, which is a project design engineering firm, and A&L Goodbody, which is a corporate law firm. I'd like to welcome you both now.
Thanks, Johnny. Lovely to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny. Good to be here too.
Yes, and I suppose a good way to start and open up this conversation is to reflect on some conversations we've had recently in our work together over the last few months. We've talked about many things. We've talked about the changing landscape of sustainability, such as the moving from CSR to ESG or EESG. We've talked about such things as what is the right framework to use and also how the language around sustainability is changing. In particular, I suppose we've talked about how do you integrate what we do into the core of business and work with other people across the organization. It's quite a wide range of topics that we've discussed. And so as a lead in a sense, to the first question, Sinead, I wonder if we actually have a shared perspective. You are in a corporate law firm. Cathriona is in a project engineering firm. I work for an NGO. So I'd ask your opinion about whether you feel that this field is moving so fast that in a way it's hard to keep up and it's hard to adapt.
Thanks, Johnny. I suppose the first thing to say is when you've been in this game as long as I have been, dealing with evolution and change is like water off a duck's back. I mean, for me, this area has always been evolving and changing. I started my career in corporate responsibility, or CSR as we called it back then, in 2003 in ESAT Digiphone, where we, thought being a responsible business was around mainly the stuff we did in community. And at that stage, it was even light touch stuff, still valuable, but stuff like volunteering, fundraising, corporate donations. And I suppose, look how far we have all come since then. We now, most of us have robust and measurable strategies that include areas like business and human rights, science-based targets, gender equality targets, ethical supply chain management. And I think we must recognize how far we have come and also acknowledge our practitioners in contributing to that evolution and progress. For me, from a law firm perspective, I think, it's fair to say we were a bit late to the party on this. So we've had to evolve at a faster pace to keep up. I joined A&L Goodbody in 2012. And at that time, we were the first law firm to employ a corporate responsibility practitioner in the legal sector in Ireland. Now, I'm delighted to say others have followed suit since. But, we had to work really hard at the beginning to educating our people and the firm to actually what being a responsible business meant, and that it wasn't just about community, that there was many other pillars involved, and, that we needed to develop policies and practices in those areas. And our strategy has been evolving ever since. We've created additional responsible business pillars that we feel are material and relevant to us as a law firm. For example, our access to justice pillar, which is about our pro bono practice. Now, that wouldn't be part of many other people's responsible business strategy, but it needed to be core to ours. And, since then, we have been, and actually at the moment, we're in the middle of creating and forming a new iteration of our strategy. And we're asking questions of, okay, what do we need to focus on? Continue to focus on? What do we need to stop focusing on? What big problem are we trying to solve as a law firm, and how can we come up with a solution to that problem, and how can we use our resources, our expertise and our skills to solve that problem? And we're also looking at the framework, as you said, Johnny. What type of framework will it be? Is it going to be 5 pillars? Is it going to be 6 pillars? Or indeed, do we need to align ourselves to ESG's criteria? Or indeed, do we need to call the next chapter of our responsible business strategy ESG? And actually, I can't help smiling when I think that we've nearly come full circle in terms of using a 3-letter acronym to describe what being a responsible business and a sustainable business is. And for me, the recent emergence and growth of ESG, which, remember, is rooted in CSR, I think has come to a situation for many challenges us practitioners have in really embedding sustainability into our business. I think for the first time, we are actually talking the same language. ESG is everywhere. You look in the papers, we're talking about ESG. On the news, we're talking about ESG. Government is talking about it. Business leaders are talking about it. And our clients are talking about it. They're asking us for legal guidance on the ESG, but they're also asking us, how are we performing against the ESG criteria. So if they're asking that question, our partners, as in our senior management, are engaged and asking those questions and wanting to know more about this space. And I truly believe that, you know, if our senior management are talking the same language as us practitioners, that I'm not going to say we're fully cracked it in terms of some of the challenges we have, but I think it very much has gotten us, if not halfway, but more than halfway down that road to cracking it.
Thank you, Sinead. Cathriona, I might invite your perspective, either responding to Sinead or even posing this question, I suppose, that do you think as a project engineering firm that you naturally are set up better than other firms, better positioned to solve sustainability problems and to involve, I suppose, the full strength of the capabilities within the organization?
Sure, Johnny, I suppose, I mean, I completely concur with what Sinead's just said, and this isn't rehearsed because I didn't know what she was going to say, but I think, you know, I think we'd all agree we've probably never seen such alignment within companies, you know, from boardroom right down to the worker bees. So that is fantastic, and we have come a very long way on that journey. And I think the other point Sinead made about, you know, that looking into our hearts and kind of going, what do we need to stop doing and what do we need to refocus on is a really simple question, but a really key question. And, you know, we can all get a bit overwhelmed with all the terminology, and I'm sure there's even people on the call now going ESG and CR and CSR and sustainability, and we're all still really grappling with the terminology. But I think, you know, it boils down to what Sinead just said, is in what do we need to stop doing? And what do we need to do more of? So that's, you know, you took away nothing else. I think that's a really good takeaway, Sinead. But I suppose from our perspective, you know, in an engineering project delivery firm, absolutely, we've a huge role to play. The buildings that we're designing today, you know, are still going to be standing in 2050. They have a huge impact on the environment and on the communities that they're in. So we absolutely are very aware of that role that we have to play and have been aware of it for a long time. But I suppose what's also interesting is the engineering sort of mindset, I think, and that's something that's maybe, you know, something that's more translatable to everybody in terms of how, you know, how we look at problems, how we break them down. It's never a fly-by-night solution. It's, you know, it's looking at it from the start. It's breaking it down systematically. So when the challenge seems overwhelming or the road ahead is huge, I think that's a key way of looking at things, to just break down that problem. You know, you can set your ambition, but at some point you kind of have to break it down into the detail and work through that process. And I suppose, and another thing that we do, and as engineers and project delivery people, is collaboration. And I think that is really going to be the nut that will help us crack some of the challenges that are ahead of us. And that's collaboration externally with what we might have considered to be competitors previously, you know, and we saw it during COVID. We saw how when, you know, philanthropists and governments and big pharma came together, how we could solve a problem so much faster than we ever would have dreamed of. So I think collaboration is key. And internally, though, as well, it's working, you know, every department in a business has a role to play, can do something. So it's getting that collaboration going internally as well. I heard somebody recently, a sustainability practitioner, talking about being on a constant charm offensive in the organization. And I thought it was a really good way of putting it, because you're constantly trying to, you know, talk to people and get them on the road and get them on the journey and make it relevant to them and what they do in their piece of the business. So it's not just, you know, the CEO coming out saying we're going to be carbon neutral, or we're going to be this, or we're going to be that. Everybody has a role to making all of those little small pieces happen. So I suppose that's the perspective we bring to it, as I say, that kind of engineering detailed mindset, and then that collaboration mindset that hopefully, you know, we can all sort of embrace. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I like the point. I mean, you design it in at the start of a project instead of having to backtrack later.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's how very large scale facilities get built. We, from the very outset, from the master planning, from right at the outset, when somebody wants to build a facility, we're talking to them about sustainability. We're trying to build in the sustainability reviews, the life cycle assessments. So all of that has to happen way before there's ever a sod turned. That's what has to happen. So it's a long process, but we're in a long game. As I said, the buildings we design, are going to be operational still in 2050 when the world needs to be net zero. So we have to start at the very, very start, and that's and we need to take that approach within all our organizations. I think is building it in at the start, not bolting it on afterwards.
Very good. Thank you, Cathriona. I might go back to you, Sinead. You made a point there about focus and making choices, and it's a really good one, because this is such a broad area. There's so much involved in it, and it's almost like we know as practitioners we can't be great at everything. We have to specialize. We have to choose what to work on, and I think from a firm's perspective, you've already got some core capabilities in there and focus areas. So is it a case, for example, that you do what you're good at, you focus on that, and you do it at scale, and you try and drive home the impact? So, for example, so as a law firm, for example, we know that in climate, under the emergencies, the most vulnerable people will actually be the most impacted. So from a law firm's perspective, is it a case that from your work, for example, working with migrants, for example, or people who cannot access legal services, do you just kind of focus on that area and say, that's where we're going to excel on sustainability?
Yes, I do believe that you need to use your core skills to create the biggest impact. And I mean, if you take actually the climate emergency as one of the sustainability themes that we will have to have as part of our strategies. I mean, as a law firm, we're not the biggest polluter, but we still have our part to play in reducing our carbon emissions, particularly our scope 3 carbon emissions, which will be challenging. And we're part of the low carbon pledge and are in the middle of creating science-based targets. However, we can use also our legal skills to have impact in this area. And that could be in the area of drafting climate positive clauses as part of legal contracts. But also back to your point around climate migration, it's about potentially supporting those who will be impacted by climate migration, and that our lawyers can, support those vulnerable individuals. I mean, we're a corporate law firm, so that means we sell and give corporate legal advice. However, we over the last number of years, we've been really developing our lawyers' skills, and we use our corporate law skills in that we support our community partners and our and not-for-profit organizations in the area of corporate law, and that is really valuable work for these community partners. However, where we want to really have impact is addressing other sustainability themes like the widening inequalities in society. And we want to give our lawyers the opportunity to have an impact in that area, particularly in the area of human rights. And we already have a lot of collaborations with the likes of the Irish Refugee Council on asylum law, reunification, family reunification, refugee law. We also work with Sparazi, which supports survivors of court and our lawyers in doing legal reviews of medical reports. And then we also work with Focus Ireland and the Mercy Law Resource Centre, where our lawyers, again, have been upskilled and trained in the area of housing law so they can support those who are homeless or at risk at homelessness. And we want to continue to do that. And we also want to address the more, like, for example, recently we were involved in supporting some of our refugee clients and their families evacuating from Afghanistan. So that is giving our people real opportunity to have impact, life-changing impact for the most vulnerable in society. And back to Catriona's point then around collaboration, I really do feel as a legal sector that we are collaborating more as a sector in this area. We have, formed the pro bono pledge, where I think over 40 law firms are committing to doing at least 25 hours of pro bono practice. And then there's also some great collaborations between Arthur Cox and ourselves and other law firms in supporting unaccompanied minors who are crossing borders because of crisis in their country. So absolutely, using your core skills to address global issues is for me where you can have the most impact.
Thank you, Sinead. I'm going to, Catriona, we're kind of coming near the end of the time allotted for this segment. So I might just use kind of the final question, whether you want to respond to what Sinead has just said, or even answer, I raised 3 key words at the start of this, revolution, being radical, and action. So, I mean, in your own work, do you feel sometimes that you need to be more radical, in a sense? How you go about that, and what might be holding you back?
Yeah, I suppose there's obviously the theme is revolution, and I suppose we heard yesterday about maybe more evolution than revolution. And maybe a happy medium for me is what the World Business Council talk about in terms of that transformation mindset. So I think that's a more comfortable word for all of us. Somewhere between evolution and revolution is that transformation mindset. And I suppose, yeah, what do we need to be doing more of? I think as practitioners, we should be comfortable and feel safe asking the why and the why nots. And I think we should be supporting organizations that allow that, not just from us, from the whole team. I think if we're not naturally those people, we should try and bring those into these conversations, those people who will ask the challenging questions, who will ask the why and the why nots, because I think that is needed, that change in mindset. We've all been in the game a long time, and maybe we're in corporates for a while, and maybe we're not asking some of those trickier questions. So I think that would be something we should do and bring into our toolkit, is that transformation mindset. I think the right attitude and bringing people in. You talked about, we've talked about the knowledge gap, and Sinead talked about upskilling her lawyers. I think we all need to accept we don't know all the answers. We don't have all the knowledge. We do need to learn and train and upskill. But I think behind that, I would have always had a phrase: hire attitude, teach skill. And I think, if you've got people with the right attitude, we'll be able to learn whatever it is that we need to learn. I suppose what else is missing, or what else do we need to be doing? Like, we can't get away from the data and the metrics. Scope 3 is coming. We're going to need shed loads of data, and we all need to start getting our act together in terms of setting those baselines, and figuring out what it is that we need to measure and what are our biggest impacts. Whether you're big or small, that's a process that every business, I think, needs to kind of get on board with. And I suppose that, maybe the last thing for me in terms of the toolkit is maybe a slight shift in our communications to real authenticity and transparency and honesty. I think that's, that we really have to get away from maybe some of the corporate speak or the greenwashing that has gone on in this space over the last 5 years. I think, we'll all benefit from a more honest conversation. We don't have the answers, and we need to be honest about that and say that and be transparent. I think all our stakeholders will appreciate that, if we do that. So this was supposed to be some of my thoughts on what the things that we need to do.
Thank you for that. So we've just heard about toolkits, and we've also had a good example there on human rights, which is a lovely segue for the next piece. So I'd like to thank you both for your contribution. I'd like now to hand over to my colleague, Darina Eades, who has a toolkit on modern slavery and how to mitigate risks. So over to you, Darina.
Thanks so much, Johnny. And I really love that discussion. You could have talked for so much longer. Good morning, everyone. I'm Darina Eades. I'm Senior Advisor on Corporate Sustainability with Business in the Community Ireland. And like Johnny, I work as part of BITCI's member services team, supporting companies to integrate social and environmental sustainability into the core of their business strategies. We're thrilled to be launching our new report this morning, How to Mitigate the Risk of Modern Slavery, a report and guidance tool for companies in Ireland. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you about why business action is needed to mitigate modern slavery, what your company can do to minimize the risks, and how the new BITCI guidance tool can help. And then I'm going to hand it over to Ben Ngobi, Accenture's Global Procurement Sustainability Lead, who's going to tell you about how Accenture has integrated the commitment to human rights into their business strategy. So our new report on how to mitigate the risk of modern slavery is needed because while there's a global climate emergency, there is also a modern slavery emergency that needs to get serious attention by business. When social sustainability is talked about internally, it's often viewed in terms of the impact on employee relations and or the need to ensure an inclusive and diverse workplace. These are vital and crucial areas to focus on to ensure ongoing business success. But what can often be overlooked by companies is the need to investigate if human rights are being upheld across all the operations of a business at all times, and if modern slavery is in any way at risk of infiltrating the company's supply chain from tier 1 downwards. There's also a perception that modern slavery doesn't happen in Ireland, that it's a faraway problem, but unfortunately that's not the case. Modern slavery is prevalent everywhere. Let's look at why action is needed by business in this area. Ongoing research is showing there isn't a single business worldwide who can say their operations and supply chain are free of risk of human rights infringements. Infringements are actually on the rise globally, and they include excessive working hours, the underpayment or non-payment of wages, the non-payment of overtime, and poor health and safety. Modern slavery is the term used to describe labor exploitation, forced labor, and human trafficking. Human trafficking is the recruitment, transfer, or obtaining an individual through fraud, abduction, or force. And trafficking is the fastest growing form of international crime and the 3rd largest criminal industry after drugs and arms trafficking. You'll see there the 2018 Global Slavery Index estimates over 40.3 million people worldwide are enslaved in some way. 71% are women. Over 8,000 people are estimated to be held as modern-day slaves in Ireland, 136,000 in the UK, but it's likely these figures are way higher because cases are hidden. High-risk sectors include agriculture, construction, apparel, such as in the sourcing of uniforms and t-shirts, industries that use raw materials for component parts, facilities management, particularly the use of recruitment agencies by subcontractors in the areas of cleaning, security, maintenance, catering, and food, such as in the sourcing, packing, and processing of fresh produce, fruit and vegetables, meat and fish. Migrant workers and refugees are particularly vulnerable to debt bondage. A major cause of forced labor or hidden labor exploitation in the supply chains of many businesses is the charging of recruitment fees to seasonal workers, migrant workers, or workers recruited through labor providers. Unscrupulous recruiters charge migrants a recruitment fee, accommodation expenses, and travel costs. They then get them to set up a bank account, but the recruiter retains the migrant's bank card, their passport, and the vast majority of their wages, paying them only a minuscule amount each week to live on as payback for securing the job, their daily travel expenses, and usually most unsavory accommodation. This is known as debt bondage. It's a frightening example of hidden labor exploitation, and it's getting increasingly more common. Nobody should ever pay for a job. The cost of recruitment should always be borne by the employer and not the worker. You may or may not be familiar with the reports of severe labour abuses in the Irish fishing industry. Debt bondage was centre stage. An investigation by The Guardian in 2015 reported that workers from Ghana, the Philippines, Egypt and India on boats from Cork to Galway were paid less than half minimum wage with no rest days. These undocumented migrants working on prawn, scallop and whitefish trawlers operating from Ireland experienced extreme sleep deprivation, inhuman hours and low pay. The migrant workers said they were controlled by debt to the recruitment agencies that recruited them, charging them substantial and illegal fees for placing them on boats and arranging visas that never materialized. The migrants had no idea they'd be working illegally, much less having no freedom, cheated of their wages, deprived of sleep, often very hungry, and confined to the boats they were on, living in fear of being deported. Victims of human trafficking and modern slavery. As an example of positive action, last year in April, the Irish Government and International Transport Workers Federation agreed mechanisms to further protect migrant fishermen in Ireland from modern-day slavery. Boat owners will no longer be able to deduct the cost of work permits from fishermen's wages. All permit documents are to be supplied to the fishermen in their own language, along with a copy of their rest hours and payslips. And the Workplace Relations Commission now has an increased role to board vessels to spot check permits, payslips, and the rest hours provided to fishermen, and if they've concerns, to report the vessel to the Marine Survey Office and the Gardaí. But it remains to be seen if these adjustments are working as intended. The meat industry in Ireland also garnered attention last year on account of the spread of COVID-19 in certain factories. It was reported that there were incidences of large numbers of workers sharing small houses, and where there were 2 shifts, workers actually sharing beds. Investigation of the factories and interviews with workers highlighted inadequate health and safety, no sick pay and overcrowded accommodation, poor working conditions at best, and certainly the optics of slave labour. The Guardian newspaper did a big piece on this issue only last week. You might have seen it. So as an example, in order for your company to know where the meat and fish used by your catering contractor is coming from, the key activity to conduct is human rights risk management or due diligence. So conducting human rights due diligence, you can see there, it means taking the steps necessary to ensure the company is not involved in human rights infringements, either through its direct actions or indirectly through the actions of subcontractors, their recruitment agencies, or any business relationships, subsidiaries, or investments. So how can you go about this? Well, there are 5 steps to conducting a forced labour risk assessment. First one is that a risk mapping of the business operations and supply chain will support the identification of the greatest areas of risk for the company. And oftentimes these are in the areas of catering, cleaning, security, and maintenance on account of the use of subcontractors and the sourcing of branded apparel, such as uniforms and t-shirts. The more you know about the practices of your tier 1 suppliers and their tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers, the easier it is to identify where the areas of risk might be. It's also a matter of assessing the level of risk in each relationship. You want to prioritize risks based on the level of risks to people. This is known as salient human rights risks, a key component of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. You also have to prioritize the risks according to the reputation of the brand. It's important to research the operations and the locations of suppliers, so you'll be comfortable about being transparent about that relationship. And it's necessary to become knowledgeable about the practices supplying companies themselves are using to identify risks of modern slavery, forced labour, or hidden labour exploitation. And it's really key to visit the supplier and the sites in person to ask questions of the people working there. The research you do and the engagement that you have through awareness raising with suppliers, business partners, contractors and subcontractors is about inspiring and motivating them to take action so that together you can work in partnership and collaboration, that really key bit that we heard so much about in the earlier discussion. The shared goal is to ensure the least possible risk of human rights violations, incidents of modern slavery or forced labour in any of the company's operations or at any tier of the company's supply chain. To be really sure, it's necessary to get to the voice of the worker regarding hours of work, pay and conditions, and health and safety. So what's expected from business and human rights? So drawing on the UN guiding principles and business and human rights reporting framework, there are a number of things expected, but essentially it's focused in on transparency, on how the company is respecting human rights and what is being sourced from what supplier, from which location. Ideally, there would be a human rights policy that's separate to the supplier code of conduct, that there will be a clear process in place for conducting human rights due diligence. Human rights will be integrated throughout the business. And what do we mean by that? Essentially, it's about a governance structure in place with clear lines of ownership and responsibility, a nominated board member, day-to-day lead, cross-functional involvement, and champions in all areas. There needs to be training for procurement staff, cross-functional teams, leadership and suppliers, and human rights has to be included in the strategy of the business, in stakeholder engagement, and in decision-making. And crucially, objectives are needed for continuous improvement in this area that are measured, tracked, and reported. Now, being able to provide all this information will ensure companies are prepared for the new EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is due in October 2022. The new directive is likely to be applicable to listed and non-listed companies with over 250 employees, a turnover of €40 million and/or 20 million in total assets. The new directive is going to require a description of the due diligence process undertaken by the company on human rights. Having a human rights policy and embedding the arising practices across the business will enable you to respond to ongoing interest from investors and clients as well, who are keen for ESG information and details of impact. In business and community, we're seeing a lot of companies have significant work to do in this area on their human rights due diligence and the risk management processes that they're using. And this fact was echoed by the National Benchmarking Report of Business and Human Rights in Ireland, conducted in 2020 by TCD Centre for Social Innovation. Their study found that 50 of the largest publicly listed companies in Ireland performed poorly across all areas of human rights disclosure, particularly in the area of due diligence disclosure, and semi-state companies achieve lower scores. So it's on account of the need for companies to focus on this area because it is the right thing to do, and because of the increased interest from investors and the increased interest in ESG information and impact, and on account of the forthcoming legislation, that we have put together this report and guidance to how to mitigate the risk of modern slavery. It's available from 12 p.m. today on our website, bitc.ie. The publication is going to help you and your company to understand human rights infringements and modern slavery in both a global and Irish context. You're going to know about key legislative and other developments relevant to business in Ireland. You'll know the practical actions that you and your company can take to mitigate the risk and occurrence of modern slavery, and you'll be equipped to conduct human rights due diligence, spot the signs of modern slavery, know what to do, and who to contact should any malpractice come to light. As an accompaniment to this guidance tool in business and the community, we also deliver awareness raising and training on how to mitigate the risk of modern slavery. And we do this with procurement staff, cross-functional teams, and tier 1 suppliers, so that they in turn can engage and create awareness with their tier 1. If this is of interest, let us know. I want to conclude, because of time, with some questions for you to consider, and you might have some investigation to do as well. Do you know, how does the company you work for currently conduct human rights due diligence? Does the company have a human rights policy? Is there a strategy with objectives, targets, and KPIs? What questions are being asked of suppliers and contractors regarding their approach to conducting human rights due diligence and modern slavery mitigation? And how is your company engaging and building awareness with priority suppliers on the goal to ensure there is no modern slavery at any level of the chain? Just to let you know, business and community provides support with all of this. An important message for you here today is for you and the company you work for to feel supported. You are not alone. Whether it's with the development of a human rights policy, supplier code of conduct, supplier questionnaire, or with supplier engagement, all companies are grappling with the breadth of the agenda. It's a journey for every company, and everyone is learning every step of the way. But I'd urge you to take the time to read through the report and consider what supporting guidance your company would benefit from, and let us know. So I'm delighted to hand you over now to Ben Ngobi, Accenture's Global Procurement Sustainability Lead. Before I do, let me just say a few words about Accenture Ireland. They're certified to the Business Working Responsibly mark. They're a signatory of the Low Carbon Pledge. They're a signatory of Elevate, the Inclusive Workplace Pledge, and they're a key supporter of BITCI's EPIC programme, which helps migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers find employment. Through their support, Accenture has been able to unlock a new talent pipeline for themselves, and close to 100 well-qualified people from the EPIC programme have gone on to employment with Accenture. Just wanted to emphasize that today. It's absolutely fantastic. Thanks a million for your attention, and I'm delighted, Ben, to hand over to you in the UK. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, Darina, and pleasure to speak to you all today, this morning. And hopefully the next 10 minutes will be insightful in terms of the activities that we are taking. As a super quick intro, yes, I do lead Accenture's Procurement Sustainability Programme based out of the London office and have been here for the past 10 years. It's interesting and exciting to see the evolution of pushing sustainability in the business, and now you've got customers chasing you, to share best practices and so on. So Darina did share a few questions with me earlier, and I'll try and whiz through them over the 10 minutes, hopefully in the little kind of update I will share. Sustainability is indeed the new digital, and I think from a personal note to all participants and all of us in this space, efforts have to be made to embed it into as businesses as best as possible. And at Accenture, one of our key objectives is to help build a responsible and sustainable and inclusive supply chain. I live within the procurement organization, and we have a lot of buying power, I would say. So we have an interest, we have an opportunity to generate long-term value for our people, our partners and communities. So we do have to make procurement decisions that also look at sustainability, diversity, and supply diversity in particular, offering opportunities to make sure that our suppliers' performance also aligns with our own values. Our supplier inclusion and sustainability program is anchored in 4 pillars. So we don't look at just human rights in isolation. So we look at environment, in terms of our drive to net zero, how we're going to power offices renewably by 2023, the carbon strategy. Actually, some mentioned scope 3 emissions. That's a very, very exciting and detailed effort at the moment as well from our side. We've got the human rights pillar, it's the second pillar. We've got the supplier inclusion and diversity. So how you engage small underrepresented suppliers into your supply chain. And then we've got the future of work, which is concerned with digitization and reskilling and helping to make sure that our suppliers understand that the role they have also to reskill their people as a result of digitization. So across all these 3 pillars, we're trying to drive gender equality, promoting decent work, reducing inequality. So our supply diversity program is about 20 countries. So we're trying to offer opportunities to women-owned, minority-owned LGBT businesses where we can, to provide opportunity, reduce inequality. We're trying to drive climate impact, responsible consumption, and of course, we do partner with quite a lot of NGOs as well along the way to help us in the countries that we operate. So in terms of our commitment to human rights, as a lead member of the United Nations Global Compact, which we signed in 2008, our commitment to supporting and respecting internationally proclaimed human rights is a common thread connecting our business, our people, and through to our suppliers. We do seek to align to the United Nations Guiding Principles on business and human rights, and therefore we do focus on human rights areas most relevant to our business in terms of potential human rights impact. We do seek to undertake appropriate human rights due diligence in accordance to applicable laws and the commitments to UNGC, UNGPs. We do recognize the importance of assessing potential risks to human rights to rights holders, not just to Accenture. But this means that our operating environment, as it evolves, we do also have to continually adapt and improve our due diligence efforts. For example, our recent update to our supplier standards in May to include responsible sourcing of conflict minerals. As a person who lives in procurement, and our sustainable procurement program is based in a procurement organization, the relationship between Accenture and our suppliers is very important, is an important area. And as such, the supplier standards of conduct is an important document which flows down our code of business ethics in terms of setting out the expectations of suppliers' behavior to uphold or make an equivalent commitment, including in relation to human rights. And in turn, we do expect our suppliers, where possible, to also flow down these standards to their own suppliers. Money, we do spend, we do buy and spend billions of dollars in goods and services from around the world. So I really think that we do have leverage and power to do change and drive positive change around the world. And to do that, we do have investment in new technology to help us review and improve our processes, to have greater visibility around ESG performance. We have a very exciting project, which is part of quite a number of projects right now, which is called our Central Procurement Hub. That platform is going to be the go-to place of how we're going to assess our vendors from when they get onboarded through RFP, ongoing due diligence. And we've also created a maturity framework so as to hopefully benchmark our suppliers over time relative to their performance, be it on environment or human rights. That platform will also help us to start engaging suppliers that we think may not be performing as well, or we need to help them perform, because really, as a leader in this space, we do have an obligation to help our suppliers improve. And that also will be a point of discussion around human rights as well. In terms of our contribution to modern slavery, human rights reporting, so we are and do contribute to the annual reporting requirements. In particular, our role in devising new and improvements around our RFP, so requests for proposals from suppliers. The whole ESG section is actually driven by our team. We do have requirements around applying a 20% scoring for ESG factors. So remember, we're looking at this holistically, although we have the different pillars. You know, where you have environmental risks, we also need to balance it with human rights risks, supply diversity, and future of work, so that we don't look at one area in isolation. So we do require our teams, where possible, to have a 20% scoring for ESG factors, and human rights is a key part of that. We do have questions in there around, you know, living wage, health and safety, whistleblowing, and so on. We do also participate in quite a number of networks, non-profit networks, that advance the sharing of best practice in this area. For example, the UK UNGC Modern Slavery Working Group Network, which I participate in. We do participate in events as well, you know, similar to this, roundtables and so on. But the whole idea here is, how do we better understand how we're performing from a human rights perspective? What kind of KPIs do we have? Do we need to improve them? Where are we falling short? And where do we require to go back to the business and request for additional investment? So that is the supplier side. But then when you also go into the internal side as well, we do have a lot of procurement people, and procurement people, just like any other business, you know, you've got new joiners, you've got established people who understand the topic. So there is an induction process that the team will run to kind of raise awareness of this topic, make sure people are always aware of their obligations to be mindful of ESG as part of the sourcing process. And the whole point here is, as people, you know, we are the ones making decisions on who we're going to source from, And so if those people know what their role in the wider scheme of things, then hopefully we're helping to reduce the risk. And actually, Darina was very key recently, sometime in August, to help us conduct our annual human rights and modern slavery training. And I think this is the second or third time, Darina. The first time was UK only, where we trained all our UK people on this particular area. But the last training, we also added Australia and New Zealand. So we are also planning on future training sessions as well for Europe. And the whole idea is we have targeted examples based on the locality of where our people are, to make sure that they understand the risks posed by their activities. So as you can see from that kind of high level view of our membership of the UNGC, we are trying our level best to flow down the requirements and the commitments in this area and make sure that we are improving how we are tracking the KPIs in this area, and also collaborating with the NGOs, globally, and Darina, from a training perspective, to make this possible. But what I'm really excited about is driving sustainability towards that kind of digital arena. So sustainability being the new digital, because I really think there is a lot to be unlocked. All of us, some of us on this call have thousands of suppliers. So you'll be employing hundreds of people. So why don't we figure out how to utilize technology to help us? For example, we have a third-party vendor based out in San Francisco that tracks our vendors real time for modern slavery and human rights violations. We get flags every 72 hours or so. But also the team is also mapping that data with another third-party vendor that we work with in the UK across human rights, biodiversity, flooding risk. So we have that complete picture. So you can imagine supplier gives us a picture of where they are. We're checking across the space to see what else the risk they might be facing. They might not know. So our role is to say, by the way, as part of our supplier quarterly business reviews, are you aware of this risk? Are you doing something about this risk in this area? So hopefully that gives you a view of the journey we've been on, and we're still moving towards that best in class, continue to or maintain it, however you want to say. But it was a pleasure to join this call. So Darina asked me to join, and I could not refuse. So thank you very much, and I hope that helped to give you a perspective of what Accenture is doing in this space.
Thank you, Ben. That was great. Absolutely excellent. And it's really interesting to hear about the continual adaptation of the due diligence methods, that it is a continuous iterative improvement process. Thanks, Meehan, for all of that. And I'm delighted now to hand you back to Johnny, everyone, for the final section of today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Darina. That was very interesting indeed. What I'd like to do now is talk about the revolution in action, which is the title of this session. So here in the third act, I'm going to bring you back into focus about those three words I mentioned at the start: radical, action, and revolution. And as we are practitioners, it's very much about what we can do and about the organization around us and how we influence it. This year I've had the benefit of voice of the customer conversations with many of you, because it seemed to me that we are at a crossroads in how we work and how we identify and how we integrate sustainability into the core of business, so that there's no longer a standalone CSR strategy, but that there's transformation from the business from the inside out, using the entire capability of the firm and the core skills that are there for solving problems and delivering sustainable solutions. That's sustainability. It's the outcome of strategy and its transformation, where the individual and the business chooses to do different things. You told me you wanted me to challenge you, and for business in the community to be that challenger, to bring in ideas and inconvenient truths, because consultants can't do that. And inside companies, it's very hard to do that. As somebody said, when I say it, it doesn't go so far, but when business in the community or you say it, it goes 10 times further. So I'm going to talk about some radical honesty at the end, which is why I think Minister Ryan, and before Minister Bruton, and all other government ministers who come in to see us and who support our programs on sustainability, on education and DESH, and on our employment programs in our work with migrants and vulnerable people who need our support. And in advance of the new climate action plan, which should be top of mind for all of us in our work and what we put at the top of our strategies, it bears reminding that we are mentioned in the climate action plan, and it is recommended that business works with us on our programs. So the first tip, use all the tools in the toolbox to be on all the platforms we are building for you that are aligned to the climate plan and other strategies and policies. Put your management system to the test in the Business Working Responsibly mark. Actively participate in the workshops supporting the Low Carbon Pledge and the Elevate Workplace Inclusive Pledge, because they're not just pledges. There's intensive collaboration underneath, and use the opportunity to learn from other practitioners. Tackle the root causes and create action experiences for people by doing one of our education and employment programs. We are geared up to delivering the climate action plan. So do these things with us, and you will be working in step with the plan and other government and EU plans coming down the track. Now, the slide that is on screen that I haven't referred to yet, and you're probably wondering what it is a model from the Nordics called the Action Competence Approach to Sustainability. Now, the Nordics are leading on sustainability and have been for some time. On the left there's a grid, and the two gray boxes on the top probably describe where we are. Business is just responding to what it has to do to stay compliant. Involvement of employees in the top right there is probably tokenistic in that employees don't have full freedom, they aren't empowered. And what we need to do is get to the bottom right square, that deep green box, where employees are empowered to act and that they are working on a well-defined problem for the business. Now consider for a moment that sustainability has become mainstream because the laws are changing. Reforms in Ireland owe much to something called deliberative democracy. It's a term you may not have heard before, but think of the Citizens' Assembly. That's been quite radical. New voices are assembled to hear evidence from experts about problems, solutions and trade-offs are discussed, and it's dealing with complex issues. There's room for deliberation, inquiry, and good facilitation and use of principles such as equality and respect for each other and respect for the facts and evidence, and as fairness and openness. You know, democracy is still a radical and revolutionary idea. And as was seen around the world, and Afghanistan was mentioned earlier, it is failing. The trampling on human rights goes hand in hand with trampling the environment. So I would argue that democracy has made a big difference in Irish society and made it a much better place than what came before. It's worked in society, so why can't it also work in business inside corporations? So a second tip, start a citizens' assembly in your work culture to involve new voices, hear the evidence from experts, take the time to deliberate and make reasoned decisions. It could be very well the case that a 21-year-old new starter might have first-hand experience of these issues than the CEO. So use the opportunity to learn from these new voices. Now, the third thing I would say is that I'm a great believer in borrowing from other toolkits that exist. So we're practitioners and toolkits interest us. So look at total quality management, total safety culture, lean philosophy tools and techniques, and systems mapping. So scope 3 has been mentioned, for example, where we have to map our entire supply chains, but don't just collect data on carbon, collect data on human rights and also on nature, the impact on biodiversity, deliver multiple benefits for the same work. On the right of that slide, you will see a reinforcing circle of action competence. It's how you will develop your knowledge on sustainability. This is a revolution. You want the wheel to turn in that direction of those arrows. In order to generate new knowledge, we need to create action experiences, which are such things as collaboration and prototypes and going outside of the safe boundaries of our office. So we have exceeded planetary boundaries, but we are still within, I would say, our capability boundary. We will cross the boundary by radical collaboration in our communities of practice. So I encourage you to participate in all of the platforms we build for you. Finally, and I don't have time to go on to my next slide, it talks about the urgency of the situation. We have a planetary emergency and we have it in Ireland too. That's why we declared a national emergency on climate and biodiversity. So what I would say is about being radical and setting up the session for tomorrow on the media. I would say that on Friday night, I was watching RTE, and Bob Geldof, one of our more radical exports, he's an example of being radical. So perhaps we should actually be asking why and why not, as Cathriona said, and saying no, and also challenging. So maybe being a bit like Bob. That's my last word. There's only so much you can do in 1 hour. I would like to thank everybody for the contributions today. Do take to social media and use the hashtag to talk about this. Tomorrow, it's session 3 in the revolution about the media. Thank you to our sponsors, and thank you to all participants in my own team and to all of you watching as well. Thank you and goodbye.